Alrighty, so next chapter we're going to talk about is just chapter 2. That's operations in the global environment. Again, there's a lot more to add in terms of videos and other things that we'll discuss in class next week, but obviously the effect of the global environment, especially, in Alaska, you see it quite prevalently since there's so much in terms of it being a hub for, the air movement of cargo, and then also the marine type stuff coming through and the shipping partners and the rest of it. For most companies like Boeing, for example, a lot of it has to do with just being competitive in terms of marketing and sales. Boeing's biggest competitor would be Airbus. Airbus is part of the, from Europe. They're in the European Air Defense. EADS is their big competitor who owns Airbus, and Airbus is made in all these different European countries, primarily France, Germany, Italy, and the UK. And so if they're going to get a lot of opposition if somebody says, if a carrier, Air Italia or Air France or somebody decides to buy Boeing, Airbus is going to put up strong opposition unless Boeing is buying from the same suppliers and is kind of inoculated themselves from that sort of distress. Also, it does make sense from economics to, number one, supply, economies of scale. If say the people in France are building a product, if they build for both Boeing and Airbus, they might be able to build a better product cheaper sometimes. But anyway, if you look at the different manufacturers, it's pretty amazing the global reach there. Rolls-Royce, Rolls-Royce, the car maker, and Rolls-Royce, the jet engines, obviously the same people. They're in Bristol, they're in the UK, but they, their aircraft engines are fairly, generic in terms of price and competitive with GE and Pratt Whitney and the rest of the jet engine makers, but they still carry that name. It's a good product, don't get me wrong, but it's not a an overpriced luxury type product. Anyway, different arrangements will be made. Now, most of these countries that are here have somewhat of their own industry, but they aren't necessarily looking for a technology transfer. There are some things when you start building products with, say, China and other folks that there will be some requirements there that some of that technology, some of that operations management and other skills, but they're more interested in the technical details, will have to be part of that package. But again, if you want to sell aircraft to the Chinese market, and there's two companies to choose from, Boeing and Airbus, if one of them is not doing business there, they're gonna put themselves at a great disadvantage. And into Korea and Sweden. So anyway, it can be very complex in terms of shipping. I will talk about an example here of the Hard Rock Cafe. Again, Hard Rock Cafe they are coming to Alaska, at least that's what they say. But their business model, we'll talk about them. They've tried to expand out globally, and they're having some success. But anyway, that was the video we'd be looking at for that day, and we may look at that next week during class. International strategies. When companies go abroad or come to the U.S., there's different ways, different strategies they can employ to do that. And international strategy, global strategy, multi-domestic, and transnational strategy. So we'll look at the sort of a different quadrant in terms of how they place themselves. You've got, for example, Boeing. Obviously, it's going to be sales are going to be worldwide. Benetton, not as much in fashion. It's kind of like an upscale Gap. They're actually based out of Italy. You may not have seen their stuff, but anyway, multinational. And then Sony. Again, probably a little bit harder times since they've got a lot of pressure from Korean manufacturers now, but obviously their global strategy is going to vary. Volvo, owned by Ford for a while, not sure if they still are. Anyway, it's a interesting product, and then the hire the Chinese manufacturer. I believe it's got some arrangements with GE and stuff, but again, in consumer products. What we'll be looking at though is again that quadrant in terms of the different strategies. But the growth of world trade, again, it's just easier to do trade. I was looking at buying some panels for a business venture. I was looking at for corral panels, horse panels, and through sites that are almost like an eBay for business, Alibaba, I was able to pretty easily get some quotes on some panels, and there were no letters involved. It was a much less burdensome process, and I judging by the English that the Chinese representative was using with me, I think there was probably some sort of auto translator there with some sort of Google app or something. But anyway, it was good, and we were able to almost work out a deal. The shipping at the end kind of killed the deal, but anyway, I can talk more about that in class. Some of the multinational corporations, a lot of times they sort of disguise their identity, or they want to portray to domestic consumers that they're sort of a local company, that you're buying American, when not necessarily the case. If you look at some of the sales outside of home country, for example, Palmolive is Colgate Palmolive 72% outside. IBM does the majority of their business overseas. Honda, Japan's small and the population's getting even smaller, so obviously they rely on foreign markets. Nestle's is huge, and Switzerland, not a very big place at all. So 98% outside, and Nestle, when you think of Purina dog food, I mean, do you really think that's a Nestle product? Yeah. So, whatever. We live in a global environment, but if you're buying American, then you aren't buying Purina. So it's kind of odd. If really your goal was to buy only domestic products, I would say you'd have a pretty steep challenge. Some of the other products that are more typically identified with a country, Siemens, for example, and Unilever. But Unilever, very few products are actually sold under Unilever, but all their consumer products in terms of, soaps, detergents, all the other products that you're familiar with, you'd probably be amazed when you realize that it was a British product. Reasons to globalize, the reducing costs, obviously for the manufacturer, for the heavy manufacturing, but that can be kind of a two-edged sword, because I already mentioned the fact that Japan was big in terms of, let's say, Sony, but then it moved on to Korea, and then it's going to move on to the next country. So if you're trying to compete on cheap labor sales, it tends to create problems, because just as China's finding out, there's some real problems, social problems that happen as people necessarily don't want to work for those low wages for very long, nor should they be expected to. So as a business strategy, it's one that's going to have to change, or you're going to have to change locations constantly, because low wage low wage labor markets are going to move around. So improved supply chain, that can help. Better goods and services, maybe certain products aren't available, and then understanding markets to a certain extent, attracting talent, improving operations. But the kind of the one that gets most people's attention and initially gets companies to move is the lower price for production of items. For example, these panels I was looking at, the price in U.S. dollars was going to be about $19 a panel. And we're talking a panel that would go for not quite $200 here. So it's just that much cheaper. So when you factored in the logistics of getting it to Alaska, it got quite a bit more expensive. Other ways for reducing costs, Macadors, those are down in Mexico. Ways of moving around. There's a lot of the trade barriers have come down, and there have been ways to do business cheaper because elimination or reduction of the tariffs. Supply chain, auto design in California. You'd be surprised the number of car designs, both domestic and Asian market, that come out of basically Southern California. Certain areas there that are known to do that in terms of creativity and perfume. Obviously, certain attributes in France and economies of scales and that certain skill. It makes sense. Provide better goods and services. Again, we can talk more about this. This gets into the intangibles, but the cultural variables and improved customer service, you can't achieve that if it's done smartly. Understanding markets. When they talk about cell phone design from Europe, that Nokia, obviously not the rising star in that market anymore. Those things have changed a bit. Some of the fads from Japan, sometimes what's a fad in Japan doesn't necessarily translate worldwide, but there are ways to extend product life cycles too by entering products into different markets at different times. And what can be the new product in, say, Brazil may have been something that's outdated here in the States. Learn to improve operations. So, yeah, General Motors, they partnered with Suzu and some other folks to try and get an inroads. I'm not sure what success they had with it. Ford seemed to be a little bit more effective in that. They partnered with Mazda and some other folks, and I think ultimately made a little bit more money than GM did on their ventures. And equipment layout with the Scandinavians. Again, certain areas have certain talents that you want to take advantage of on a global scale. Attract and retain global talent. So, better growth opportunities, insulation against unemployment. The relocation of personnel to more prosperous locations, that's kind of tough to do internationally, but it can happen. Cultural and ethical issues. The cultures are quite different, and punctuality. Having lived in Madrid for 3 years, I certainly, late for work does not mean like a whole season. I mean, I still have things in Spain that are stuck there because the business, they took off for the summer basically, and lunch breaks turned into well never returning. So anyway, the environment, again, I don't mean to be anti on this stuff, but I've just seen some things. For example, when I was in Europe, the Saar River that sort of defines the German-French border was pretty industrialized, had a lot of steel plants on it. So there was some concern about the carbon footprint of all this steel being produced. So what did they do? Well, they closed most of those folks down and they moved all that steel production to China. So in terms of global warming, was that we're fooling ourselves. They're still making as many cars, but now the steel is being produced in China with less environmental restrictions. And oh, by the way, they need to put it on a ship, and it needs to sail all the way to Europe to be processed. So, they consider themselves, environmental stewards, but actually I think they did more damage than good. And thievery, bribery, child labor, we've all seen the news on that. But, in the bribery, what we consider culturally as bribery in other places. For example, I was trying to bring an airplane into Turkey, and I needed to come up with a certain amount of money to basically, it was a customs expediter fee, and thousands of dollars. If you want to do business, that's what's going to happen, because the official involved, he doesn't get paid enough by the government, and this is the only way he can operate, and the rest of it. And anyway, nobody else seemed to have a problem with it. And if you wanted an airplane there, that's what you had to do. So anyway, it's different standards. And there's certain things we do in this country that obviously other folks would consider unacceptable. And anyway, the cultures are quite different. Companies want to consider, obviously, a lot of these different factors. A lot of it, too, in terms of if you're moving there purely for economic reasons, for cheap labor or whatever, if you start factoring in some of these other things like some of the inflation rates, some of just the cost of doing business, some of the baksheesh, the basically the bribes that need to be paid, the difficulty in logistics. Again, those are going to erode against the value of that cheap labor. So many times, though, I mean, you just can't overcome it. If you can produce a product for that much cheaper, that the company may move, but it's not always. If you're just comparing on the basis of the dollar figure or the labor amounts involved, it's never as rosy as it appears. Here's just the thing we were talking about with the different products and who they're actually made by, and who you think you're buying. This sort of links up. I mean, Lamborghini is Volkswagen. It's actually helped out Volkswagen. There are some products. Volkswagen also makes Bentleys and other items, and Alpo and Nestle. They own the whole Purina brand. MGM to Sony, Jaguar. Yeah, the whole UK is kind of being recolonized. Tata is a Indian company. They build large trucks, and actually they build all kinds of cars, but I've seen a lot of their large trucks in Africa and in the Middle East, and they own Jaguar now. Firestone, Bridgestone, and the rest of it. Braun Household is actually a Procter & Gamble product. So here's another one. So product of company. So you think you're buying this German Braun item. No, it's actually a U.S. product, and Firestone, Bridgestone is all Japanese. Lamborghini out of Germany, and Jaguar out of India with Tata there. Lamborghini's kind of interesting. Those folks, I don't know if you know the history, but Lamborghini, they made bicycles and heaters, and my home in Spain, the heater was a Lamborghini, and a lot of it was just normal industrial products. But the guy made quite a bit of money, and so much so that he bought a nice Ferrari, but he was so disappointed with the Ferrari service that he opened up his own company. So obviously that's happened some years past, but the factories down in northern Italy, they're only about, 70, 80 miles apart, and you could go see both in a day. But yeah, Lamborghini, it basically exists because of Ferrari's poor customer focus. Managing global services and operations. So require a different perspective on capacity planning, location planning, facilities layout. So all that stuff's going to change when you move to global operations. And again, just this isn't some light decision to be considered quickly. It's fairly permanent. Once a organization has decided to move, if they do just move in total, it can be fairly permanent. Key success factors: supported core competency. So service, distribution, promotion. This chart's it ends up being a bit of an eye chart. We'll reference it in class, but there's a lot that goes into quality and production, especially when you move overseas. Activity mapping. Southwest is kind of unique. They came into a market. The airline industry in general has lost money as an industry, since its inception. There's sometimes a few that make money, but by and large they lose money as an industry overall. And Southwest was the exception in the fact that they've been profitable. And how they did it was just by doing extreme process analysis, and then streamlining it and passing all that on to the customer. And it started out with the customer focus. It's kind of funny. There's another company called Ryanair in the UK that we'll talk about that took this example quite a bit further. So how do they do this? No automated ticket machines, so no seat assignments, baggage transfers, no meals. Anyway, all this kind of speeds it up. The customers kind of feel like they're on a no-frills airline, but if they're paying a no-frills price, they're pretty happy for it. And the no-seat assignments, people get in and off a little bit quicker. No meals, again, quicker. Higher number of flights, more productive employees. They went with just 737, so a single type of airplane. So in terms of maintenance and training and parts and all that, everything's very simplified. Pilot training, again, universal pilots. You don't have a guy who's checked out on one type and can't fly another. You can just swap things around. When they're talking with Boeing, they're talking from a position of strength because they're such a big customer for them. Trying to, sort of beat down the unions a little bit to get a better price. 20-minute gate turnaround times, so you don't have the jets sitting there idle. I mean, it's such an investment in terms of equipment. If you can keep those things up and going, that's good. Automated ticket machines, empowered employees, and hire for attitude and then train. Again, we're talking not necessarily crew. The crew usually come to them checked out, and then high level of stock ownership, high number of flights. So Ryanair, what happened was there was a guy, Larry, from obviously an Irishman, who came and worked for Southwest. He didn't need to be working for anybody. He was a multimillionaire, but he went ahead kind of, I don't know whether he was, undercover or whatever, but he did it for 3 or 4 years, worked for Southwest and got deeply involved in their business, learned everything about it, how they do it, and he took this overseas. And so if you do fly in Europe, you'll see their company, and that's $9.99 in terms of pounds. That's about $15. So obviously a flight for $15. A lot of times, I've flown on these guys quite a bit, and it is kind of a bad neighborhood in the air. But if you want to travel cheaply and quickly, which most tourists do, it's pretty easy. They are huge in these small, well, not so small fees, but if you need to use a credit card, for example, they'll charge you a fee for that. If you go over your carry-on allowance, huge. Sports equipment, huge. So they make their money, but not necessarily on the ticket price. And then it just keeps going. If you depending on the bags, how you do that, you can, and also the season, it gets quite expensive. So the international strategies that we were talking about before, when a company's going to go internationally, they've got different ways to move forward. So in this case, U.S. Steel, Harley Davidson, they aren't necessarily going to differentiate their product for that market. In terms of the arrows to the side there, you'll see low cost reduction considerations and low local responsiveness. The mystique of the Harley, if there was a Japanese version of the Harley, people wouldn't want it. They want the Harley. So an international strategy will work for them, and the product stays pretty much uniform. Global strategy, here there's going to be some variation. They aren't going to be super responsive to the customer, but it's not going to be varied and tailored to the customer. So you're going to see the local responsiveness is going to be low, but cost reduction considerations are going to be high. Again, things like Caterpillar and Otis elevator, there are going to be some differences, voltages and hertz rates, some of the electronics from the variations when you go globally, but again, not highly tailored. Multi-domestic, though, what you're going to do here is you're going to get, something like McDonald's is probably the best example. When you go overseas, you're going to see the familiar signage and all, but the McDonald's inside is going to be slightly different in terms of the products that are offered. If it's in Germany, obviously there's going to be beer in addition to soft drinks. There's going to be quarter pounder means nothing to those folks, so it's going to be the McRoyal, hamburger McRoyal, and then you're going to have all these different sauces like for McNuggets or whatever. It's going to be Polynesian type sauces and curry sauces and different things. So they're going to get that model that worked domestically, and then they're going to tailor it through franchises, joint ventures, subsidies, things like that. And then transnational, these are companies that don't even want to really be identified with a host, a host nation. So Coca-Cola, we know they're based in Atlanta, a U.S. company, but they try to pretend that they're larger, that they're a worldwide entity, that they don't have a certain location. And Nestle is the same way. They are a Swiss company, but they're so little of their business is done in Switzerland, 2%. It's not necessarily relevant. CNN has tried to do this, like in terms of media. It hasn't quite worked for them, but a lot of times they'll pretend that they're not a U.S. news organization, that they're a worldwide entity. This chart, again, it depends on who's presenting it. This Transparency International, so they may have an agenda to grind here, but in terms of corruption, they're saying Russia's the most corrupt, and New Zealand is pure. Where did they put the U.S. on this? So the U.S. they put us about in the middle there. Again, it depends, and it depends on individuals as well. So there's a lot of things that can happen internationally, and you may not have any recourse against them in terms of some sort of opposition to corruption. And again, one person's corruption, that just may be the cultural norm. And we'll talk more about that in class. This is going to be the homework. So the Frito-Lay discussion, you don't necessarily need the video on this. They'll have some information in the book on that. I will show the video again, and then the Hard Rock discussion questions. Again, if you want to delay doing the homework till we get together in class and talk more about it, that's just fine. The homework is turned in before the exams, so although the homework's assigned weekly, it's not turned in until the week before the exam, so don't stress on that. All right, and good luck. I'll put this on the web, and I look forward to meeting you all next week.